All right, I'm sharing my screen, but is it large enough, or do I need to change the view shed at all?
It's perfect.
It's perfect, yeah.
Okay.
Um, and I think there's still people trickling in, but we can go
Sure.
ahead and get started. So thanks for coming, everyone. We have Nathan Anderson here to speak. He is the director in GAO's Natural Resources and Environment team. He works on two high-risk areas, the project and contract management at the DOE and the U.S. government's environmental liabilities. He has been with GAO since 2001, where he served as a director on the Homeland Security and Justice team, where his work focused on Coast Guard and maritime security and critical infrastructure protection issues. He's also served as an assistant director on the Natural Resources and Environmental team, where he has examined DOE nuclear waste cleanup. He has earned a master's degree in public policy from Georgetown University and a bachelor's degree in economics from Whitman College. And he also holds a graduate certificate in international business management from Oxford University. And he's completed American University's Key Executive Leadership Certificate Program. He works at the Seattle field office for GAO, and I will let him take it from here.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation today. Just in terms of housekeeping, please let me know if my audio isn't clear enough, or if there needs to be any interruptions for questions. The last thing I want is for you all to listen to me for an hour. I'd much prefer for this to be a discussion at some point. And I'm happy to be nimble. At the root of what I do, I work for Congress and assist in their oversight responsibilities. So being nimble is kind of part of the job requirements. And I'd like to certainly entertain that today, if anybody wants to take the conversation in a particular direction. So just let's just do a little bit of background, right? Like, first and foremost, thank you to CRESP. My portfolio of work at GAO, we rely heavily on CRESP's work, CRESP's contacts, very complementary missions. We at GAO go anywhere and everywhere that the taxpayer dollar goes, but for perhaps the Federal Open Market Committee meetings and the black box operations of the CIA. Everything else is our purview. We do 90+% of our work at the request of Congress. Those requests come in either as letters from committees and subcommittees of jurisdiction, or as mandates in law. We do reserve the right, the Comptroller General, the head of my organization, reserves the right for a handful of projects every year to be undertaken with Comptroller General authority. And what that means often is those things that nobody wants to ask us to do because they're hard, politically sensitive, et cetera. We wade into that space because really, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is be responsive to issues of national importance, and protect the taxpayer and the taxpayer's investment. And oftentimes we come in and talk. Oftentimes we wade into that space to talk about those issues of national importance and ask questions where questions need to be asked. My area of responsibility, as was indicated, is really in nuclear waste cleanup, as well as environmental liabilities that the government faces. And so I'll talk about some of the specifics there as we get into this presentation a little bit farther along. One thing I want to point out is, I spend a lot of my time working with the Department of Energy, and I really appreciate the folks at DOE and the folks at the Office of Environmental Management who are tasked day to day with working on the cleanup mission. To a person, their hearts are in the right place. They're trying to do what we do, and that is make government work better. And so sometimes that means we are questioning things at a very micro level. We are looking into internal controls. We are looking at the specific parsing of phrases in a strategic plan. we joke around at GAO that sometimes, like, if God would have given us the 10 Commandments, we might have sent it back with track changes. That's sometimes what we do. Yeah, and I'm sure it can feel like that too, if you're on the receiving end of some of our audits and investigations. But other times, we're in a position, perhaps a unique position in government, to question the rules that agencies and programs have to play by. There are many times that folks in government space, in the Department of Energy, for example, they see that there are some suboptimal outcomes. Those suboptimal outcomes, are the extension of requirements that may merit by being questioned, and we serve that role as well. That role oftentimes is best illuminated in our high risk series. Now, I've got a 2021 slide up here. We issued a high risk update in 2023 as well, and we'll do another in 2025. I apologize for not updating these slides, but if you want the latest and greatest, gao.gov will give you the latest. There is one notable change to our kind of most recent ratings on one of these issues, and that is within the Office of Environmental Management. We increased the rating for leadership commitment to being fully met. We had long rated, I'll say, leadership commitment within the Office of Environmental Management as partially met because there was pretty high turnover. Ike White, the current head of EM, has been the longest serving EM1, and has put forth a lot of initiatives that will span his tenure, and we view that as a positive because of the lengthy nature of the cleanup responsibilities that EM faces. Those at the state level and those at the local level benefit sometimes by having some of that continuity, and if it's leaders that are coming and going, that's okay, as long as there are some institutional controls on some of the initiatives that can span those administrations, other than what can sometimes be felt like a moving of the goalposts at the state and local level. We as a country face some huge fiscal challenges. Our environmental liabilities are a microcosm of probably some of our greatest fiscal challenges, and an unsustainable path that we are on. When I started at GAO in 2001, we as an agency were talking about being on an unsustainable path then, and it has only gotten worse. And so we try to shine a light on some of these difficult issues. When I say the U.S. government's environmental liability is a microcosm of the unsustainable fiscal path that we're on as a country, what I mean by that is, at least in the space of like nuclear waste cleanup, if you look at the trends, the liability is growing at an extent that is greater than our annual expenditures on it. And so when we started looking at this issue in 2015, I think the environmental liabilities for nuclear waste cleanup were around $200 billion. We're spending $7 to $8 billion a year. Now they're north of $400 billion. Well, I think from a congressional perspective, if you're investing in something, to buy down a liability, you want that liability to go down over time, and that hasn't been the case. That said, I think to give the department credit, that the gap, that the increase was really not having a full understanding or not being able to fully cost out some of those responsibilities that the department knew it would have. And so in our conversations with DOE over the last 8 or 9 years, I think what we've been able to help perhaps better identify and better cost out some of those remedies that the taxpayer is going to have to invest in the future. Of the U.S. government's environmental liability, probably assume this because I've been talking about it a little bit, DOE's is the largest share. DOE represents about 85%, and that is mostly in the realm of nuclear waste cleanup. Other liabilities that exist out there in the government, think of like abandoned mine cleanup. Those mines that were abandoned before some of the legislation that put forth responsibilities on mine owners, taxpayer owns that. Good, bad, or otherwise, we have to pay for it, and that's an area that is getting increasing attention, but just to try to put something digestible out there, those are outside of DOE space. Those are some of the liabilities that exist that add to that top line number of north of 600 billion. Focusing then back on nuclear waste cleanup, there's 15 cleanup sites. This slide says 16. Since this slide was put together, Brookhaven came off the list. I think we're sitting at about 15, and 3 or 4 of the sites are more challenging than others. We expect in the course of the next decade or two, this number is going to shrink pretty rapidly. Just another graphic that kind of shows the outpacing of growth, or the growth outpacing the investment in estimated environmental liabilities. This is where I'll spend this slide. I'll spend a little bit of my time on, because even within the EM space, there's a long pole in the tent, and that long pole in the tent is the Hanford site in my home state of Washington State. Many of you likely know this, but Hanford was central to the Manhattan Project and the nuclear weapons production era. We have a moral and environmental responsibility to clean up the pollution that stemmed from that multi-decade effort. And that's where we're at today, is still trying to figure out a way to address some of the nastiest stuff that's out there. The environmental liability itself doesn't fully reflect all likely costs, because accounting rules, which our accountants help write, talk about booking what's reasonably probable and reasonably estimable. Well, if a remedy hasn't been selected yet, it's not booked as probable or reasonably estimable. And so while the environmental liability associated with the Hanford site might be in the $250 billion range, total system lifecycle costs suggest it's likely anywhere from $350 to maybe $650 billion in future taxpayer expenditures that we'll have to go to clean that up. I'll hit on this a little bit more in a future slide, but one of the drums we beat is risk-informed decision making, and that is something that we hope to bring to the Hanford site as well. That the risk of any cleanup or the investment in a cleanup remedy should be aligned with the risk that particular source of pollution represents to both human health and the environment. And we feel that there's some pretty big opportunities at Hanford to rethink the status quo, to disrupt the status quo, if you will, and to take a more risk-informed approach in a way that will both benefit the environment, human health, and ultimately the bottom line when it comes to costs. So this slide talks about likely growth, and while likely growth in the environmental liability is a near certainty, I want to point out that this doesn't do justice to DOE and EM and some of their recent efforts in totality. You see this bullet here about GAO having identified factors that contribute to growth, one of them being EM doesn't have a nationwide strategy. That was true several years ago, and I don't think that we would call that true now. And we are updating in preparation for the 2025 high risk update some narrative around this. EM under Ike White's leadership has made great strides, I think, in developing a nationwide strategy for. The second bullet under that, talking about EM doesn't manage its work as an integrated program. I think that is an artifact of how the Office of Environmental Management came into being. This is a little bit of exaggeration, but sometimes hyperbole can illustrate the point. Folks in the weapons program went home on a Friday, and on Monday the switch was flipped, and now all of a sudden there was a cleanup program. With the ending of the Cold War, there was a pretty rapid shift in responsibilities under DOE to begin to be cleaning up. And so a lot of the sites themselves, the states and DOE and EPA had to negotiate these individual agreements. And many times those individual agreements were negotiated in a way that did not take into account other agreements that were being made. These agreements came in pretty rapidly. In certain cases, that was fine. In certain cases, that resulted in what I would call a suboptimal allocation of resources. We still see some of the implications of those of that history today, and GAO continues to advocate for maybe some changes to the rules of the game that will allow for a more optimal allocation of taxpayer resources. EM has long faced project management problems. I want to give EM some credit here. Lessons are being learned, approaches are changing. Yes, there have been some pretty mammoth project management challenges in the past that have led to some fairly significant growth in costs and extensions in schedules. And we need to remind ourselves that the contractors, in many cases, they are dealing with one-of-a-kind technology and are dealing with some pretty nasty stuff when it comes to hazardous and radioactive waste. I am going to skip ahead and talk a little bit about some of the management challenges that DOE and EM face. I talked about leadership commitment earlier, that there was a lack of continuity in programmatic initiatives and frequent turnover. Current head of EM, again, has been there longer than anybody else and has put forth some really promising initiatives to help that continuity even when he is gone and when a new head of EM comes into being. Risk-informed strategic plan. DOE and EM are making strides in this area as well. We believe that there's still more work that can be done in this space, but you kind of applauding these efforts to change the status quo where necessary, and at least to have the conversation about what might be an investment that is more aligned with the risk that the underlying pollution has for both human health and the environment. Unreliable cost and schedule estimation, that speaks a little bit to some of the project management challenges that I referred to earlier. And then I'm going to jump ahead to inaccurate and incomplete reporting on cleanup progress. This is an area where we still don't have a full understanding of the extent of contamination that exists from the nuclear weapons production era. The most difficult sites are those that remain. A lot of the easier sites have been cleaned up, but we still have some polluted groundwater and some polluted soil that we're still trying to get an understanding on in terms of the extent of contamination. And so there's, in that space, there may be both opportunities to find a smarter way of doing business, and there also might be some contamination that is found that is more problematic and will cause future costs to rise. So I'm going to pause after this slide and kind of try to get a read of the virtual room before going into some of the more project specific slides that I have in this presentation. What are the opportunities out there? What are the opportunities for pursuing a smarter way of doing business? Risk-informed strategic plan. If there is an activity at site X and a different activity at site Y that is much riskier, we have advocated for at least the conversation and the analysis to include how do we do some trade-off analysis? Do we need to spread money evenly-ish around sites, tackle everybody's perceived problems, or is there an opportunity to view the cleanup complex as an integrated program and perhaps reallocate certain resources to those to where there can be some benefit? We've seen this a little bit with some of the process contaminated facilities. We've advocated for accelerated cleanup in certain cases for an infusion of funds so that the department isn't paying high hotel costs to just kind of sit and wait for a facility to be D&D'd. We think there's opportunities to continue pushing in this direction. Alternative treatment approaches at Hanford. We have long talked about the need for grout for a portion of the low activity waste at the Hanford site. And this is an area where the risk of that the waste poses is pretty low. So does it need a multi-billion-dollar treatment approach? When other sites and other countries have demonstrated that a grout technology, which is much more inexpensive, is probably a better treatment approach that's aligned with the risk that portion of the tank waste poses. And then along those lines, deciding how to close those tanks. Does it make sense to exhume 177 tanks that have, that will still have a little bit of contamination, and the exposure to humans, the airborne exposure that could occur, or do we need to have a conversation about maybe grouting those tanks in place? And so it's how you weigh those relative risks and how you pursue that analysis of alternatives. Is going to perhaps lead to different outcomes, but the conversation needs to be had, and so those inputs need to be considered. The rest of my slides deal with some very specific reports that we've issued recently. I've been talking for 21 minutes. That's long enough for me. I'd much prefer to have this be a little bit of a discussion. Lara, maybe I'll lean on you to moderate or guide or call on people if there are discussions, or you can tell me if you'd like me to go through some of these individual reports. I can do that, but for a moment I'm going to pause.
Yeah. Are there any questions so far from the group? Please feel free to speak up.
Nathan, if I can ask one, this is David, and I very much appreciate you joining the group today and presenting. This is terrific. How does GAO look at the cost per unit risk reduction? Or is there any metric or approach that it has to say, what's the relative cost for the relative amount of risk reduction we're getting?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, because that's something that we're looking into quite a bit. We've put that information out on grout versus vitrification, grout versus glass, looking at both Savannah River and the Hanford site, to try to draw that comparison, because that does, in my view, that's an outcome measure, and GAO that's bread and butter to what we do. Like, how do you measure the performance of your program? What is the benefit that the taxpayer is getting for the taxpayer investment in what EM does? And in our view, it's important to say that the unit of concern is, in one case, radioactivity, like in the tank waste at Hanford, tank waste at Savannah River. So how much does it cost to reduce, 1 curie of radioactivity, to treat and immobilize 1 curie of radioactivity? That's a far better measure and an indicator of performance than to say, we pumped 1,000 gallons of groundwater. Pumping 1,000 gallons of groundwater doesn't give an indication of how much risk was reduced. And so we've, in both 2017 and then more recently, I think in 2021, with an update in 2023, we put forth information about the cost, like cost per curie is kind of the phraseology that we use. And we are trying to get DOE and EM to embrace that kind of outcome performance measure for a broader suite of their cleanup activities, for a variety of reasons. But one of those reasons is where there are distinctions. If there are big gaps across sites or across cleanup technologies and approaches for similar types of waste, maybe then that is a prompt for assessment. Like, are we doing the right thing? If it's really costing 6x at a particular site or with a particular remedy.
Thank you.
Well, I have a little bit of a left turn question. We have several people who are kind of finishing up degrees here, and I was just curious if you could kind of speak on what daily life at GAO looks like, and whether, I know that there's several different offices. Do they each cover different subjects? Do you all kind of work together? Like, what does that kind of structure look like as well?
I appreciate that question, because now I'm going to put on my recruiting hat. I probably should have led with this, but look, one of the cool things about working at GAO is we have an influential voice on issues of national importance. And we want people who want to have an influential voice on issues of national importance. Now, that influential voice is backstopped by some rigorous methodology that ensures objectivity. So it's not like what Nathan's opinion is doesn't get to lead, the messaging. I came to GAO and and got to be involved in some incredibly interesting issues that I knew nothing about. And in the course of going through, a couple of these projects, I learned about the checks and balances that exist to ensure that we are designing, our approaches objectively and in such a way that biased information, can't lead the discussion. Some people have talked about how like a GAO report, which could take anywhere from 10 to 18 months, is not unlike a dissertation. But the cool thing is the audience is Congress, and then the audience is the public. And there are times when our congressional clients don't like our messaging, and that's okay. We put it out there anyway, because our protocols with Congress are, once you ask us to do something and we've accepted it, we are going to be transparent with our report, regardless of whether the requesting body likes the message. And so it feels, it kind of lets you go to sleep at night with a clear conscience, right? Like what we're doing is rooted in fact. What we're doing is rooted in objectivity, and we've got a system of internal controls that ensures that. And that's one of the reasons I've stayed with GAO for coming up on 25 years. I certainly didn't walk in knowing anything about nuclear waste. In fact, most of what I did before becoming an assistant director here was in far different fields: clean water work, federal lands work, electronic waste recycling, safety of genetically modified foods. Really cool stuff. So it's a great place if you don't exactly know what you want to do when you grow up. It's also a great place if you do know what you want to do, because we have these specialized tracks. There's, I think, 15 different divisions. Mine is natural resources and environment, about 200 people in it. We do everything from nuclear weapons to food safety. We also have a science, technology, and analytics team that has cost estimators, PhD scientists in all sorts of disciplines, theoretical chemistry, for example. David Costin has spoken with a number of our folks from our science, technology, and analytics team, and participated on National Academy of Sciences panels, with some of those folks as well. So noting that there are people in the audience who are probably thinking about their next step, or maybe thinking about their next step in their professional career, I will offer, you have my email, feel free to reach out, because again, we go anywhere the taxpayer dollar goes, and we have an influential voice on issues of national importance. Our clients are Congress, but by extension, our clients are the public. And so the information that you work, the novel analysis that you will do, and that's what we do. We do novel analysis. Congress doesn't ask us to tackle easy problems. They know the answer to the easy ones. They ask us to tackle the hard ones. If you want that analysis, that novel analysis, to see the light of day, we're a place I think you should consider.
Thank you. Are there any other questions before Nathan keeps going?
Yeah, this is Kevin Brown. Can you hear me?
Yes. We can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Somebody was smart enough to mute me before. I was going to ask a follow-up to David's question. So when you said cost per curie, that's certainly a much better metric than most of the ones that we've seen. But you also mentioned the trade-offs. And as you trade off curies for other types of risks, and there being no normative basis for how you would judge those sorts of risks, are you going to come with multiple metrics for looking at this? Things like worker risk increase as you do certain actions or certain remedial activities? Or is it basically your normative basis at some point always comes down to dollars? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Certainly our normative basis never comes down to simply dollars. I think what we're asking for is, let's put forth those measures that don't exist that need to be considered if we're talking trade-offs. And at the moment, some of those normative measures don't appear to be part of the conversation, which is why we've recommended in the past that they should, or we have put forth information that reflects those outcome-based measures and asked for Congress to consider those as part of the trade-off analysis. If you're considering vitrification or grout, you're not going to just look at cost per curie. Certainly that's part of the equation, but what are the worker safety risks associated with vitrification technology versus grout technology? What are the emissions? What's the environmental risk associated with vitrification versus grout? And then at its root, what is the risk of the waste that you're trying to treat? All of which has a space in making a decision on a cleanup remedy.
All right. I think maybe just keep going with the slides, I guess, unless there's any more questions.
So I know you booked this for an hour. Did you want me to fill the hour? What's the best use of the audience's time, Lara?
I mean, I think that if you want to kind of keep going through what you have prepared, it would be nice to hear the kind of the rest of the presentation. We can go for the whole hour. So
all right. Well, at the risk of losing the interest of some, I'll try to be less monotone and keep it interesting. I think some of the slides that I put at the back half of this presentation really are aimed to reflect the type of work that we do in a single portfolio. When thinking about GAO, I want you to think, okay, there's like 200, 150 portfolios around our organization. We have 12 field offices. We have a vibrant remote work structure. We basically have people who live in all 50 states who do work for us and work on these different federal programs. But at least in my area of responsibility, I'm going to focus a lot on nuclear waste cleanup here. I feel we still do a lot of different kinds of stuff that ranges from the super qualitative to the super quantitative, super technical, super social. The first one I'll touch on is EM's leadership capacity. We got an interesting request a couple years back from House Armed Services that basically said, hey, let's, would you take a look at like the organizational chart of the Office of Environmental Management? Is the leadership structure set up in such a way that can help achieve the mission being, cleaning up the legacy of the atomic weapons production era and the Manhattan Project? We took a look at it, and sometimes our recommendations aren't nearly as important as the data that we present from our data analysis. And I think this was an interesting job for us because we showed there was very frequent turnover and certain periods of time of the Office of Environmental Management's existence. They were changing leadership every 14 months. There was a lot of acting candidates during that time, and while sometimes that can't be avoided, what we tried to do is get a sense for how is that landing on the communities where DOE is doing the cleanup work, and that resulted, in an interesting, I would say, an important conversation. We made some recommendations to Congress that Congress didn't implement, and that's okay, because I still think it highlighted the need for some continuity, even if not of people, of initiatives, because if the sites that are, the states and the local communities where these sites are feel like the goalposts are moving, or there's whiplash in some of the messaging they're getting from Washington, D.C., credibility can be lost, and there needs to be credibility. There needs to be a building of trust in many of these sites and localities for the cleanup mission to be able to move forward. Totally different kind of project. The next one on the list. This is us doing like a kind of a mile wide, inch deep look at all of the major projects and operations around the cleanup complex, looking at their cost and schedule performance, performance measures. This was not doing a deep dive on a specific one, rather putting in front of Congress. Here is the menu of items that you're funding. Here's how they're doing, and from these major projects and operations, can we detect some key themes that we think you, Congress, should be aware of? At that time, that was 2022. It illuminated for us that workforce capacity issues were front and center, and this is an area in which DOE and EM has long struggled, but they're not the only ones. There are workforce issues around the federal government where it's hard to get people with the right knowledge, skills, and abilities in the right positions. Hiring authorities are what they are, and you can't always get people to serve a role that needs to be fulfilled. And so that was one of the key themes that came from our review across. It looks like Autumn Taylor has a question.
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for your presentation so far. It's really informative. I was wondering how the GAO decides on, I guess, the types and number of these like reviews that it takes on. And then is the outcome of all of these public information, or is it only delivered to Congress?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's all public, with the exception of work in classified space. You know, if we do have, even in my team, like, nuclear weapons modernization work, there's some things I can't tell you about that because it's classified, top secret level. So we have internal controls around that information, around those jobs, and around the briefings that we ultimately give to Congress, to keep everything at the appropriate classification level. But everything else we get in ends up with a public product. Sometimes it's a letter product, sometimes it's a correspondence. Almost all the time, it is something like a report that is publicly issued to Congress. In terms of the first part of your question, deciding what we do and how many, we have 3,500 people in our agency. I think we issue anywhere from 600 to 1,000 products a year. Those include congressional testimonies. How we decide on which ones to accept, we give priority to first and foremost mandates, things that are written into law. If the National Defense Authorization Act is signed by the president and in it are 10 provisions for GAO to do reviews on items 1 through 10, we do that. It's in law. For congressional requests, we give priority to committees of jurisdiction. So in DOE space, think House Energy and Commerce. If we get a letter from House Energy and Commerce and it's signed by both the chairperson and the ranking member, that's a strong bipartisan signal. We're going to do, that is amplified in its level of priority for us to tackle. We don't give any extra weight to the majority party. We review or we accept requests from the chair and the ranking member with the exact same weight. And so that is one of the ways we ensure our political independence. We don't answer the call of the majority party before answering the call of the minority party. I'll stop there. It's kind of a long-ish answer. Did you have any follow-up? Did I answer your question?
No, I think that's awesome. So then I guess if it's more about prioritizing, have you ever rejected a review? And what kind of things would you reject on the basis of?
We've had requests come in from individual members where we've just had to say we won't be able to get to them. We don't have the number of staff to be able to answer your specific question. If the person's not on a committee of jurisdiction, they're allowed to send us request letters, but in this day and age, we would likely respond and say, unless you're willing to wait 10 years, we're not going to be able to get to it. We have also not, there have been times where we have been asked what we would call a biased question. And for example, if we got a request letter in from Congress that said, tell me all the ways in which DOE is breaking the law, we would go back and say, we're not going to do that because the question assumes DOE is breaking the law. We can offer a more objective wording of a question that would allow us to explore, potential issues with noncompliance, but we're not going to accept that letter we're not going to do the work based on that letter as written. And so we'll negotiate with the requester. If the requester is unwilling to budge, we're not going to accept it. We're not going to do work that is biased by its original parameters.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
One other thing I'll throw out there, what I think is kind of a cool aspect of GAO is the Comptroller General of the United States is appointed by the president, serves a one term of 15 years. they can't, so there's no, that's trying to insulate from, from some of the political influence that can exist in Washington. So 15-year appointment, the current Comptroller General is coming up on that year number 15 next year, but it's it's appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. President can't remove. It's never happened before, but I don't believe a president can remove a Comptroller General. It takes like a majority of Congress or something. Again, something that's never happened before. So all of that is to develop insulation from political influence over the work that we do.
I think Megan has her hand raised as well.
Thanks, Autumn. Yeah, my name is Megan Harkema. I'm at Vanderbilt as well. I'm going to try to ask this question well, but I may need your a little bit of implications and seeing where I'm going with it. So I know that a lot of federal agencies are limited in, the ramifications that they can impose if another federal agency that they're responsible for overseeing is not doing something up to snuff. For example, the DNFSB. And you talked about how the reports that GAO produces are able to influence policies and decision-making in that. So can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, happy to. So we are in no way an enforcement agency, and so we don't have any law enforcement powers. We are an extension of Congress's oversight responsibilities, and so we have an investigative function, a program evaluation function. And what we do is where we find issues and that need to be resolved, we issue a recommendation, and we send the recommendations to the executive branch agency. Let's talk my language, Department of Energy. So if I have 12 projects in any given year, 12 reports are going to come out. Probably 10 of them are going to have recommendations to DOE about how DOE should do something or some things better. Now, DOE is on the hook, requirements from Congress that they need to respond to our recommendations within 180 days. And they have to, by the time our report comes out, they actually have to say we either agree or don't agree. We concur or we don't concur with the recommendation. Then after 180 days, for those recommendations that they've concurred with, they send a letter that says, here's how we're going to implement this recommendation. Now, we're held accountable to Congress by a series of other actions, and that is we're supposed to hit an 80% recommendation implemented rate. And that implementation rate is so that we don't issue pie in the sky recommendations that can never be implemented. They're supposed to be actionable. And so we have a 4-year window. We report to Congress in the last 4 years, here's the percentage of recommendations we made that were implemented. We also have targets for financial savings. One of the things we like to tout at GAO is for every dollar we receive in appropriations, we return over 100 back to the Treasury in money saved. So it's if we were a business, we'd be invested in. It's a huge positive return on investment. But we have targets for that too, to make sure that we are looking into areas that can benefit the taxpayer by identifying potential for cost savings. So that's really the structure that exists, is that Congress, in its power, holds the executive accountable by asking the executive branch, let's say DOE, what recommendations have you not implemented that GAO has made and why? And so some of that comes out in the annual budget hearings. But it's really that part of the check and balance process in our federal government that creates the control structure that we operate in.
Awesome. Thank you. That helps me a lot. I would also just recommend that when you're pitching GAO to people, particularly PhD students, maybe don't emphasize that they're going to write additional dissertations every 18 months.
Fair enough. Point taken.
I have another question kind of off of Megan's. This is Autumn again, by the way. If you, or maybe you have, in the past almost 25 years you've worked there, come across something, I guess, illegal or close to illegal happening, have you ever, like, does Congress actually take action on that if you discover something? And what does that process look like, if it happens at all? Or do you not even evaluate the legality of things?
Yeah, we do. Our Office of General Counsel has a bid protest function, and so that's like things like contracts, acquisitions. You know, we'll look into bid protests, the legality of certain award decisions, et cetera. But that's, for me, that's boring. So I'm not going to talk about it. You talk to our lawyers, and they're going to be mad at me for calling it boring. It's a really important function. It's just not my thing. So I'll talk about what is my thing, and that is if in the course of an investigation we uncover something we think is illegal. We have a fraud department that works closely with the Inspector General of each executive branch agency. And if our fraud department gives information to the executive branch agency's Inspector General, and the Inspector General does not take action within 60 days, it goes directly to the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice reviews it and determines, okay, does this need to be investigated for something illegal? That's a path for if we discover something illegal. That's not the only path. A job I worked on, 18 years ago was looking at, was looking at hazardous waste exports. In the course of that job, we found that there was what we suspected was rampant illegal export of hazardous waste, and we could see on these like the eBay or the Craigslist of some of these foreign countries, U.S. companies advertising the sale of this hazardous waste because it could have a beneficial use in these countries where they had, less worker protection, less environmental protections. EPA at the time, their enforcement regimen didn't exist. I mean, they had an Office of Enforcement, but they said nobody's breaking the law. And so our report, we created some fictitious companies. We're not a law enforcement agency, so we're not entrapping anybody, but we're going after people who have shown a willingness to sell illegal hazardous waste online. We corresponded with them via email as if we were foreign businesses. In these emails, they'd say, don't worry about EPA rules. EPA doesn't enforce this. I'm like, okay, now we kind of got you. And that report found 43 companies willing to break the law with illegal hazardous waste exports. That got Congress's attention. That got EPA's attention. 60 Minutes got a hold of it and ran an episode called The Wasteland, where they highlighted a lot of this. That changed the game. And kind of the phrase I use to describe that aspect of our work is sunlight is the best disinfectant. When you shine a light on certain practices, sometimes you will find that there's disinfecting that needs to occur, and that light, shining that light on it, brings attention to it. To EPA's credit, within a year, they had set up an enforcement regime. Over 100 cases, a handful of which were criminal, were brought forth. A number of people went to jail. It worked. The process worked, but that was because we were able to shine a light on it.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Are there any other questions before you keep going?
Looks like there's one.
Nathan, this is Tim Fields. I'm glad I had a good response to the EPA question as someone who worked there for 30 years. But I'm just curious about this has been fascinating, great presentation. What happens, the new Congress comes in January 2025. How do you transition new requests from Congress into all the existing projects that are on your workload and your priorities at the current time? How does that process work of integrating new requests, new priorities that come from members of Congress as you transition into next year?
Yeah, great question, and it's never an easy balancing act. But at the end of the day, the new Congress doesn't have any any greater priority than the old. So I'll operationalize this a bit for you. I have a compendium of work, and I've got maybe 10 or 12 mandates from the armed services committees in that I have to get to. Haven't started yet. New Congress comes in, we're going to spend a lot of time talking to new members and saying, here's who we are, here's what we do, here's how we can help. Here's how we can help in front of the scenes, here's how we can help behind the scenes. By behind the scenes, I mean provide technical assistance. Like if a new member comes in, is on House Energy and Commerce and know nothing about DOE cleanup, I'm going to want to meet with them and say, here's what we think you need to know about your area of jurisdiction. They send in a request, goes to the back of the line. Senate Armed Services Committee gave me something to do 6 months ago. I'm going to get to that before I get to the new Congress. Now, we try to balance our outreach in such a way that we are timely, that we don't have these lengthy queues and basically surpass our relevance in a given Congress, because we know it's a 2-year life cycle in many cases. If they ask us to do something, in January, we're not relevant if we're issuing that when the next Congress comes into being. And so we have to sometimes get creative in terms of how we interact with Congress to maintain our relevance and to not be issuing a report a year after when it would have been useful. And I see some comments coming up about the slide presentation. I've basically departed from it altogether at this point, and that's fine. I didn't want to necessarily get into all of the details of some of these individual projects, but hopefully you have them. You can look at them if you have time and interest. And they really, the back half of the presentation gives you a flavor for some of the type of work we do, particularly in this nuclear waste cleanup space, and some of the findings and recommendations that we have and that we put forth to Congress.
Yeah, we can have Jody send those out if we need. If people are interested. Are there any other questions? We're kind of getting towards the end of the time, so please ask if you have any more.
Well, and I'll throw out there one thing. I started the first 20 minutes. I was talking about some of the key themes, but also some of the details of nuclear waste cleanup. I know nuclear waste cleanup isn't everybody's the thing that wakes you up in the morning and gets you excited. For the David Costin and Kevin Brown, yeah, we like some of this stuff, and it gets pretty interesting. But it does give you, hopefully, a flavor of the kind of work we do at GAO, the vehicles of communication we have to Congress and to the heads of executive branch agencies, and really, we exist, on behalf of not just the taxpayer, the U.S. citizen, really, to try to ensure where possible and encourage smarter ways of doing business with federal resources. And since many of you are steeped in PhD work and dissertations and the like, another cool thing about GAO is we do novel analysis and we have access to get data, right? Like, executive branch can't tell us no. They have to give us the information. And so if you like playing with data that you can't always get, that can be a fun aspect of our work as well.
Is there a particular review that you've been a part of that you found, I guess, particularly interesting, or you were really excited to be a part of, or do you just enjoy every one that you're in?
Well, the one where a number of bad actors went to jail was pretty cool. I was a project manager for that one, so that I lived and breathed that for a year, 40 hours a week, day in, day out. That was my thing. For the last 10 or 12 years, I've been in management, so I've done a suite of projects. As an assistant director, I might have had 4 or 5 of those at any given time, and now as a director, 12 to 15 of those projects. What I would say I enjoy now is being able to connect dots across some of these engagements and then meet with members of Congress, sometimes have in-person briefing with representatives or senators and say, here's what all this means. Here's what a couple $1 million worth of investment in GAO means. And with some of our messaging recently, we've been able to articulate for them, you can save $95 billion. And that's a good place to start that conversation, right? Like, because most things in Washington, D.C. are a zero-sum game. You plus up one budget or one program, something else has got to go down. But if we, if in my position, I can come and say, I can help you do something safer, faster, cheaper. It doesn't happen a lot in government space. And so people listen. And if that means, following the path of a different approach for a cleanup remedy, people want to have that conversation. They don't always want to have it in public, but they want to have that conversation. They want, and I feel like with some of our work right now, particularly at Hanford, we're on the cusp of some big changes that we've worked really hard at for 7, 8, 9 years. So hopefully if I end up talking to any of you or some of you or all of you a year from now, be able to be a little more specific with some of those, some of those achievements. But it does feel pretty satisfying to say what the taxpayer has invested in my career and my team's career, we've been able to turn around and offer a return on that that's 100x.
All right. Are there any final questions? Last call. Okay. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for this presentation. It was very, very interesting, and it was very cool to hear about all of the work that you've been doing and what GAO does. It's nice to learn something new. So thank you so much.
No, you're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me, and please, the offer is sincere. You have my email. Reach out. I know that not all of you are nuclear waste geeks, but I can put you in contact with those who work in areas in GAO that are aligned with your area of interest. And it's a cool place to work. I'd be happy to facilitate that conversation for you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care, all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.